Assalamu alaikum. Irfan, thank you very much for that. You performed very well over here. I'm going to stay here in case I fall over, if that's okay. But thank you for your teaching and leadership. Thank you for the introduction. Junaid is Vice Chair of London Citizens. We work together. We have not fought each other, but fought together to preserve the sanctity of the civil society organisation which it is. Also wonderful to see so many people here that I recognise, and thank you for turning up, because you probably heard the story before, but it may be a little different tweak than you've heard. I thought I would take the issue of leadership and what it is, since everybody potentially is a leader. That's our experience, so that's one little lesson. If you think you're not a leader, please don't deny it. Many Muslims, in my experience, deny it more than other folk, frankly. I think it's a wrong teaching. I'm sure Prophet Muhammad didn't say this, peace be upon him, that you're not leaders. He was very clear in his teaching about what leadership is, and I would not, I'm too humbled, I hope, to reflect what he was saying, but frankly, we need leaders more than ever in this country. Leadership and public life I want to talk about, because they go together. There isn't enough leadership in public life. There is some sort of leadership in public life, but not the sort of leadership we're going to talk about. I'm going to try and share with you by really reflecting on the last 3 Fridays. I thought it would be useful because I have a privilege of being a community organiser. Citizens UK is the home of community organising. We do organise people on purpose, but not just people who are leaders and people who are in their institutions. So one of my other messages, if you have given up on your mosque, don't. Stay with the mosque. Stay with the institution that you've established. We need institutions. People in collectives are better than people on their own. There is a tendency in this country for everybody to think they're free if they're on their own, and that is counter to the human condition if you think you're free and you're on your own. I know our institutions are not perfect. I'm a Quaker. My spiritual journey is Christian. I am Anglican originally, but have found the Religious Society of Friends as the loosest alliance of seekers after truth there is. And that is a very important thing to me. But still, every Sunday I go to a meeting and meet for an hour, mostly in silence, frankly, to reflect on who I am and who God is and how I can be a better reflection of Allah, effectively, by using the power of that meeting and that collective to take that out into the public life. Because the other danger with institutions is they stay in themselves. Silos are a danger for us all, particularly my Muslim friends tell me, for Muslims who are a little timid about going out with the institution into public life. My Muslim friends are brilliant public servants in their own life as doctors and architects and creators of better life for us all. But how do we take the mosque as an institution into public life? That is part of my journey with Junaid and Dr. Barry and others who are here who I recognize. How do we make our institutions even more perfect than they already are? They already provide a wonderful social services for the world. They already provide counseling, training, remembering and teaching, and so remembering what the original teachings of the Prophet, peace be upon him, were. But also, how can we make that institution even more significant, more powerful than it is? Because we need it. We need mosques. We need churches. We need synagogues. We need collective groups. We need Islamic Society Great Britain more than ever, because these are the pillars of a democratic society. The groups, if you are in membership and you haven't left them, are the pillars of a democratic society. Britain needs these pillars. They are marginalised in the public debate. That's part of our issue. They are not taken seriously enough. That's partly why people leave them. Often they pursue the wrong agenda. That's partly why people leave them. Often they get hung up on issues which are really not that important to this country, but they are to identity, I know, like Israel and Palestine. It's not actually something that is going to change the world, and there are some things we can do nothing about, which I would commend institutions parking, not ignoring, but parking, so that the institution can focus on the things that people have in common, which is usually the street, the need for a job, the need for a better wage, the need for a better education, the need to be respected and recognized as people created, we would say, as Christians would say, in the image of God. So that's two things, really. Leadership is, I believe, staying with people. It's very difficult to lead. You have to sort of lead on your own, but actually a leader is somebody with a following. That's another lesson we have, and we teach that all the time. There are celebrity leaders, there are political leaders, they have a following, they're called the electorate, effectively. But actually, given I don't recognize any politicians here, that's not a form of leadership. We would absolutely respect that, and that is very, very important. But if you don't seek to follow that sort of political leadership, then frankly that doesn't mean to say you're not a leader. You have an example. If you've got a family, obviously you're a leader in the family, but actually in your institution, you have to learn the skills of leadership, which is to develop a following of people who will be impressed, I guess, by you and your example in order to change the world. So the last 3 Fridays have been significant in this story. I recognize my friends from Spresser up there. Last week on a Friday, I was at the annual, it was Women's Day, and I went to the Royal Festival Hall, which was the annual celebration of women and their role in the society, and the role that migrants and refugees have played in the shaping of this country, particularly in the last 20 years, is very, very important and not given enough recognition. And there the folks who have organized that put together the Migrants and Refugees Women of the Year Award, and that was a wonderful evening honoring women who had come to this country as asylum seekers and refugees who had frankly transformed the world around them. That's particularly good leadership because obviously often folks have to do this and they have no papers or they've already fled tyranny and they've come here for a quiet life and still they have to fight. So that's another issue I get which Irfan referred to, which is the recognition that life is a struggle. It doesn't stop. It continues all the way through, frankly, till we've had enough, which is death. That don't think that when you've achieved one thing, that's it, and you can stop and resign. One of the women who received the award last Friday was a woman called Rima, who had fled from Kosovo, and I have to pay tribute to Tony Blair and what he did for the Kosovans at that time, where he went, and part of her story is he went to the refugee centers in Macedonia and basically met mostly women who had fled the tyranny of the oppressive, at that time, Serbian regime, or regime from what was Yugoslavia, and he recognized that, frankly, they were being killed and that he had to get them out of there, and he did the wonderful thing which politicians can do and had planes to bring people to this country, particularly those with medical problems. She deserved that. I met her on Tuesday in Glasgow, and she is running a wonderful centre full of light and in energy, and lots of other refugees who are making the most of their position and being welcomed by the Glasgow citizens people because of the leadership they show. This time last night, I was in Loughborough Junction, where we have just built a small alliance. Citizen organising is about bringing people together in alliances. There is a theme here that we're better together. That if you can get institutions to work together, there's all sorts of things you can do which you can't do on your own. Definitely as individuals, you can't do on your own. Even mosques on their own can't do some of the things that you can do if you're in an alliance in a non-Islamic country. It's got to be diverse as well. So Loughborough Junction, we've just built an alliance with the local mosque as an active member. So are 3 or 4 primary schools, 1 secondary school, a couple of Pentecostal churches. They were celebrating the fact they'd all be in the same room. They did politics like you've never seen it. It was heaving with people with prams and mostly mums, 90% black. That's the nature of Loughborough Junction, which is in the south of Lambeth, if you don't know where it is. The mosque had his 4 or 5 people in the mosque table. There was an 18-year-old girl who'd brought 30 girls from her school with her and her dance troupe. She's a leader, in our opinion, because actually leaders are people who not only have a following, but that can turn them out. That is critical in public life, that we have full meetings. And she was able to express why she'd managed to do that, how she'd managed to do that. It was after something tragic which had happened to her that had made her sort of stand up, fight back, and develop people who respected the fact she'd done that. This time next week, Dr. Barry and I and another 25 people will be at Downing Street to meet with Mr. Cameron, because as an alliance, we now have a relationship with the 3 party political leaders, which is part of our story, and it didn't happen immediately, to talk to him about the general election in 2015 and the possibility that we will put on the biggest assembly of the election period with our members. And membership is very important because there's rules about membership and what you can do and how you can behave, which will have the 3 party political leaders on the platform responding to the people's agenda. So that's the other thing which is very important to us. There's this recognition from people who have some power to those of us who have a little bit of power, but if you mix up all that power together, then frankly, life is much safer and much more peaceful. So that's the other lesson about leadership, is power is very important. The determining factor for those who can do things and can't do things is the reality that power, people power, organized power, used for good in the context of a value-led organization like a mosque is a good thing. It's not a bad thing. Don't be frightened of it if it's in a context of an accountable system where people can vote and people can leave and the money is raised by the organization. So that again is part of our experience. London Citizens and Citizens UK are power organizations. That has led us to the Living Wage campaign. It's led us to fight on different issues which are meaningful for families. That's the other important thing I guess we've learned, is that there are sectors in this country. Peter Drucker talked about the 3 sectors that make any democratic society work. The market has its place and is magnificent. The state has its place and is magnificent. And civil society is the most important sector and absolutely has its place. They have different interests. Most of mosques, if I may say so, lie, and I know MCB is very proudly stating this much more clearly than other faiths. Its purpose is the common good. Its constituency is civil society. There are some religious traditions who aren't too sure on which side they're on and want to be on everybody's side, and actually I'm not sure that really works. It's good to be on the side of families, because families make the world go round. We all come from families, and the role of families is much underestimated, partly by the state that doesn't know too well what to do with us, and whenever it tries to get involved in family life it messes up, and absolutely by the market, who has really one interest, which is profit. There's nothing wrong with that, but that is its interest. The interest of the state is to serve needs. That's nothing wrong with that, and God bless it for doing so. But the interest of civil society is the development of leaders in the institutions that they have created to ensure that the other 2 sectors work in their interests. You get the point, that these interests are different, they are equally valid, but civil society is the most important and blessed sector which needs the most leadership, particularly at this time when the other 2 sectors are particularly powerful. They claim the airwaves. The market particularly is the most powerful of the sectors and needs to be humanized so that it recognizes not only should it pursue profit, but it also should respect leadership when it confronts it and says, hang on, you've gone far enough, you've got to pay decent wages here. Hang on, you've gone far enough, you've got to give our kids apprenticeships. Hang on, you've gone far enough, you've got to provide some jobs for people in the local area who need those work. And that's effectively what leaders do, is to come up with an agenda, work with other people, recognize that civil society is precious, is so precious where we come from. It needs leadership, as I say, like never before. The leaders civil society need are people like yourselves who have a following and a faith and a spiritual quest which should not go in on itself, but frankly should liberate us to be more effective in public life. If you choose to stand as a council, that's wonderful. If you choose to be an MP, that's magnificent, but you don't have to do those things. You should choose to be on the board of your local mosque or the local Islamic group or the local governors of the local school, because all those institutions need this form of quality leadership, of people that see there is a bigger quest than just sitting on the board of governors. I was the governor of Stepney Green School for the last 12 years. I have sadly stood down. It's not a life-enhancing experience. Any other governors in the room? In a state school, it's hard work because we are used to vote. Well, we've never had a vote in the governors, which so the head teacher rules the play. But it has its place. Public life, public commitment, very important. Leadership, very important. And indeed, you can change the world. And that is totally our experience. So it's to finish with that. If you organize effectively, we have managed to organize 8 of the major mosques in London here, and we're now organizing other mosques in other cities to persuade them that their interest is best served in a mix of people who aren't all Muslims. That's very, very important in this country, because you bring a preciousness. Islam, Muslims bring a preciousness and if I say so without sounding too precious, a purity which has been a little warped in some of the other traditions. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, taught us about neighborliness. And when asked who the neighbors are, he was, if you know this more than me, he said it's the 40 people to the right of you, it's the 40 people to the left of you. He didn't say it was all the Muslims on the right and all the Muslims on the left. He also said when pressed, yes, but Prophet, tell us who really are our neighbors. He said it's the people closest to you, the houses closest to you. That's an important lesson which the other faiths sort of teach. As a Christian, we believe that we have to love God and we have to love our neighbor as ourselves. So how do you do that in a global world when there's other people with lots of other messages which are distorting those messages, telling us we can sell stuff because you want to be better than your neighbor or you want to be different from your neighbor. So these messages are historic and they are created by the founders of our great faiths, and that's what we have to cling to. So the spiritual journey is important, the teachings about leadership is important, the role of our mosques and Islamic institutions is very, very important, but particularly important if they mix up, if we mix up with others who have the same values. And then we come up with an agenda which is exactly the same as everyone else's agenda. How do we make the street safe? That's a common theme. In Glasgow, I was in Glasgow on Monday and Tuesday, and I noticed that the young woman who's a Roman Catholic was driving me around, that her car sounded like a tank. And we went over another pothole and another pothole and another pothole. Because the thing about community organising, you have to find out something first which will surprise people to work on. So we don't work on big moral issues. We don't talk about Palestine and Israel. We start with what can we agree on here. In Glasgow, there's a terrible sectarianism between the Catholics and the Protestants. The Muslim community is quite strong, mostly professionals who've gone there as doctors and lawyers and so on. And so to try and find something was fairly easy. As we went through along in this rattling old car, we noticed that actually potholes is a big problem in Glasgow. And quite quickly, by the end of the day, we'd concluded that potholes is what we're going to start on. If we can't fill the potholes in Glasgow, let's not talk about Israel and Palestine. Let's not talk about feeding the hungry in Africa. Filling the potholes is the quest, because that gets us to work together on something we can agree on. And that is leadership, is finding something pragmatically that you can agree on with other people, then being strong enough and powerful enough to persuade those who have the money to deal with the potholes to do so. That gives people encouragement that it's worth them getting involved in public life, particularly the leaders who are looking for something like this, the young leaders, the 15-year-olds, the 11-year-olds. Some of our best leaders are 7. In primary schools. They don't get complicated about theology too much. They basically say the world is not very fair, what can we do about it, and when are we going to do it, anything about it now. They want to do something about potholes now. They know they can't do much about Israel and Palestine now, so let's get the potholes sorted. I hope you recognize the message, and what I've been saying is sort of helpful. It's leadership, particularly form of leadership with following. It's the role of mosques and Islamic institutions which I applaud. My experience of the best leaders in the Muslim community is that they have stayed with their institutions to shape them, to make them relevant to the issues of particularly their young members, so that people stay with those great institutions without which this country would be undemocratic, because we would just have Westfield Shopping Centre and individualism, effectively. I say it with respect. Westfield is a very important player, I guess. It is a very important player. It employs people, but it is a threat. It's a threat because it implies that shopping is the main meaning of life. And we know going to our institutions is much harder work than shopping, but nevertheless, stay with them. Don't necessarily emulate Westfield. Stay with those institutions. Establish new institutions, youth clubs, scouts, whatever it is, to keep the young people with us. That is critically important for the future of Britain as a healthy democracy. Thank you for that opportunity.